Welcome to the Rejected Religion podcast. I'm Stephanie Shea. As we find ourselves in December, the last month of 2020, and also the month when people usually gather together with family and friends to celebrate Yule, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and New Year's Eve, I thought when planning this month's episode that it might be nice to focus on the Winter Solstice. However, this has also been a very challenging year due to a worldwide pandemic, and many of us will not be gathering together with loved ones for the holidays because of it. So this month, I decided to do something different and take another approach, that of inner, personal experiences, instead of outsider observations, as is often the case with academic researchers. For this purpose, and in keeping with my original idea of family, friends, and holidays, I asked my Aunt Patricia Shea, or Aunt Pat as I call her, if she would be willing to come on the podcast and talk about Celtic spirituality from an insider perspective. My Aunt Patricia is Professor Emeritus of Education, with a long career as a principal, director, and counselor in various educational programs. She also holds an MA in Religious Studies. Currently, she is a life coach, facilitator, and spiritual director. Patricia was also a Catholic nun in the Order of the School Sisters of Notre for many, many years. At this stage in her life, however, she considers herself a Celtic Crone, and her work includes, as she states it, providing opportunities to understand and experience the multiple facets of Celtic spirituality and how the Celtic understanding of the sacred can be lived in our everyday modern lives. What Patricia will be sharing in this interview is an integration of what she has learned from others within the area of Celtic spirituality, combined with her own personal perspectives based upon her life experiences. We discuss what she feels is the difference between religion and spirituality, leading to Pat discussing the Celtic Wheel and how this is attuned to the earth. We also discuss her ideas about mysticism, and Pat shares her perspectives about Mother Earth as a sentient, wise entity who offers us opportunities for learning and insight. This leads us to discuss what has been happening in the world due to the pandemic. As I stated before, this is not an academic discussion, although Pat is an academic, but it's more of a space for her to share her own insights about her spiritual path that I feel are worth sharing with others too. So I hope you will find it interesting. Welcome to the podcast, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. As this month's episode is focusing on personal experiences, I thought we might start with a bit of your own story. I mentioned in the introduction that you had been a Catholic nun for a large portion of your life, but at a certain point you decided to follow another path, that of Celtic spirituality. And you've been practicing this for around 20 years now. Mm-hmm. Could you talk more about the reasons you felt you were not on the right path in your service as a nun, and how you came to know about Celtic spirituality?
That's a great question. If I could reframe that question, if
Sure.
you wouldn't mind.
No, not at all.
I wouldn't say that I was on the wrong path and needed a new path, as much as I would say I was following a path that at the time made sense, so that when I came to, as many paths do, divergent paths, that I had to make a choice. Do I keep on this one that I'm familiar with, or do I explore?
Okay.
And what calls me to explore a different path? So that first path helped me get to that exploration of the divergent path, if that would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
so that's how that happened. And it was really, I've been living Celtic spirituality since I was born, probably even in my mom's womb somehow. I mean, she would forever say how she was pure Irish. Well, she was pretty right on that spot, because I did an ancestry.com and found out, that's what I am too, Not so much pure Irish as more Irish, but Celtic, Scots and Wales. And, but that Celtic DNA, that Celtic ancestry is very deep in me. And when I entered the community, the School Sisters of Notre Dame, that was a genuinely saving grace for me, for my spiritual life. It truly was. I went to the convent school in high school for 4 years before I actually entered the community officially. And that was a real nurturing, because we had every morning, got up early, did a prayer, did a meditation, did the Catholic rituals of prayers. And that was very nurturing of my soul, of the journey, of the spiritual journey. And then all of the other experiences that I had in the community, I'll never, ever be able to live long enough, nor have enough lives to thank the School Sisters of Notre Dame for the gifts that they graced me with throughout my life. Because the curious piece is the little that I know of the real Celts. I know a little bit more about Celtic spirituality than Celts themselves, but they love learning. They're always learning. They're always learning how to adapt. That's why they're still alive and well today. That's why that spirit is still there. And in the School Sisters of Notre Dame, one of the reasons I stayed so very, very long was I so believed in the mission of the community, which was to educate women and children and the disenfranchised, those who were of poverty, but of all kinds of poverty, really. And I still believe in that mission. And I never really jumped 100% in the middle of the community. I lived more on the fringe of the community. One of my classmates, when I was sharing that with her, I was in the community, and I said, I really feel like I live more in the fringe. I mean, I followed the rules, but some of them I thought, maybe ish, you don't have to go that far with it, and so I sort of thought, well, there comes a time, and actually my classmate said to me, well, Pat, if you weren't on the fringe, those of us in the middle wouldn't even know it. So, so I thought, okay, I believed in the community. I believed in the women who had the power to really affect change that was critically important through education. And I hoped that I would be part of that mission. And what really started to, I think I was always on the exploration part of always wondering why, or is this really how it's supposed to be? Like even living on the fringe, it's like, is this the whole story, or, isn't there more to it? That kind of thing. And so, but I was really supported in those questions throughout my life and throughout my education. And because in the community, we were always being educated. You never stopped learning. It was always learning, which I love to this day. I love learning. It's a joy to do that. Even in all of the angst and the drama and contortions that I go through learning, I still love doing it. But it was when I was at my 25th anniversary of vows. I had made final vows for 25 years, and the community had a program where you would go to Rome, where our general aid is, and spend a whole summer there to go even deeper into the community and visit the sites where all of the foundresses were and all of that. And probably 5 or 6 years previous to that anniversary time, I had a real opening experience about what I really saw was the misuse of hierarchy in the Catholic Church. When there were about 200 of us nuns waiting for one man to show up to celebrate the Eucharist, to celebrate Mass. And I thought, I'm sitting here with women who are so good and so brilliant and so holy, who could lead ritual in a much greater, deeper, fuller way. And we're sitting here waiting, and the fellow was late. You know, it was a shift in my understanding.
Yeah.
So living that shift and then getting to that 25 years, I thought I have to either jump in fully or jump out fully. Fringing isn't appropriate at 25 to go over to Rome and to invest time, energy, effort, and money into my journey on that particular path. And that's where I started to see the diversion.
Okay.
And thought, no, I can't keep doing that. And then when I went through the whole process of asking for the indult of whatever the indult was, I can't remember, was the permission to leave and to be released of final vows. There's a word for it, which escapes me at this moment. But the General Superior at the time wrote a letter to me, and she said, you'll be leaving the house, but you won't be leaving the family. Which was such a wholesomely, holy in the sense of WH and H response to supporting my journey down the paths that were that were divergent at that point. Yes. And so I have always felt like I've always been a school sister of Notre Dame. I've never felt that I'm not that. Okay. It's just, I just don't do it. I'm not only on the fringe, I'm on the outside, but I'm still a cousin, or, right. I'm that black sheep that they think, well, maybe she'll catch on, that kind of thing. I really do. They're wonderful. The women in the community are so wholesomely and genuinely dedicated to goodness and to helping people come to learn, to explore the reality and the goodness of creation, of divinity. And that has never left me. And one of the things that I was doing as I left my spiritual guide, who is also a school sister of Notre Dame, I said, well, now what should I do? What new program should I go to, or what new degree should I get, or all that. And she suggested that I explore spiritual direction. And because I had a master's in religious studies, and I have a master, I have all. Anyway, you had to keep learning, that you just kept going to school. Anyway, so my question was, when I was in my late 40s, okay, now what degree am I supposed to be now, Leaving, I got to get another degree, but it's like, no, she said, you don't have to do degrees anymore. You got enough, She says, but what do you want to explore? So she suggested that. So I started that program. It was the Hayden Institute, which was very inclusive and general. It wasn't of one particular religious thought or program. Mm-hmm. It was a very open program, and that's why she said you'd probably like that, and I did. I loved it. But the first thing we had to do was write a spiritual autobiography.
Right.
That took the longest writing I have ever done in my life, and when I was doing it, I came across this book. This was in 2000, of Maura Freeman's Kindling the Celtic Spirit, and I had already started to read that. And I was writing my spiritual autobiography, and I thought, oh my God, I've been doing this stuff a long time, my first experience, the question is, you start with the first experience that you had with divinity or the spirit or whatever. And my first experience, that I remember it as clear as if it happened just now, of going down the hill of our house, sitting within the tree roots of this huge tree that was at the bottom of our hill, and sitting there and lying in those roots. I was probably 4 years old, 3 or 4, and I would sing songs to God, and I knew that tree was embracing me. I knew it. That tree loved me. I loved that tree. And I could sing. I don't think I always sang songs to God. I think I just sang, made things up. Because I made up songs, that's what I did. I would go, but that was my first genuine spiritual experience. And then I went on throughout. In grade school, I had them. Even in the Catholic Church, going to church every day in a Catholic grade school, I remember having... I guess some people would call them flights of imagination, and I guess that's what they were, but I thought they were they are spiritual experiences. As all that ritual is going on, I would think, what would I do to honor the spirits? I would have lots of flowers, and I would do these flights of imagination while we were supposedly, kneeling and saying the prayers and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I like that quiet time to do that kind of thing.
Yeah. So you've touched upon the actual fact then for yourself that you've been practicing Celtic spirituality much longer than you knew what that was, or you had heard that, as a title of something. Can you talk about was there one person in particular that presented this to you, or was it more of just a organic type of picking up on all of this as you went along?
It was really Maura Freeman who, her
book that you mentioned. Okay.
That book that I mentioned.
Okay.
And then I did one course with her. She has 3 courses in Celtic spirituality. I mean, it's more than that. But as I read and I would reflect and I would do the meditations that she does, and which are really wonderful and exploratory and soul searching, and so going through all of that, I was really, really led to understand more deeply what was in my disposition already.
Right. Okay.
And be able to give it some sort of a name or a form of some sort.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. Okay. So before we go any further into your own personal experiences, perhaps it's a good idea to talk first about what Celtic spirituality is. And if you do like a quick Google search, a lot of different things come up. So some things say it's more of a form of spirituality that is more Christian in nature. Others say it's more pagan in nature. Could you talk more about this and, how you see it and what Celtic spirituality is, in your opinion?
Yes. And this is Pat Shea version.
Okay.
Okay. This isn't anybody else's. This is how I put it all together. But
wonderful.
I see, first of all, of starting with spirituality and religion, because they'll take care of that Christian.
Yeah.
And I'll talk a little bit, if I could, about my perspective on paganism, but it'll help a little bit. But typically, religion is a particular system of faith and worship. It has codes. There are certain beliefs you have to follow. There's certain rituals you have to follow. There's a certain way that you bond between the human and the divine. It's real. It's, in my perspective, religion is scripted. And depending on the religion, it can be rigidly prescriptive or it can be fluidly prescriptive, but it's still prescriptive of some way. Mm-hmm. Because if you go out of those bounds, then you're a heretic within that religious belief system.
Right, understood.
Where spirituality can be related to religion, and yet it really isn't related to religion. Spirituality, in my sense of understanding it, is really the ultimate experience of that inner path and that inner calling, that you start discovering things that are bigger than what meets the eye. It's like breath. It's there. We know it. But when we try to say, do you see it? Well, no, you don't see our breath unless it's cold and you get the fog of it. But spirituality is as vital to our being as breath is, because it's a way of living a life beyond what is visible. And even when we say, well, that's sort of fluffy out there, religion asks us to live in a life that's invisible. Yes. Spirituality, though, has no structures. If we're going to be true to ourselves, I believe that each one of us has our own particular and peculiar spirituality that we find connection with a certain way of using words to express it. So my Celtic spirituality were words and experiences of my lived life that said, yeah, that's the right word. That's the word I was looking for. So different spiritualities have different vocabularies.
Okay.
And they're translatable into different languages, into different spiritualities. So a lot of the things that I look at in the Celtic spiritual path is very much what I see in Buddhism, in Taoism. It's very much what I see in the Christianity of believing in the goodness of earth, and in the Christian terms, and in the Jewish Testament of what the Christians would call the Old Testament, is God created the world. So there's a sense of creation spirituality in that, which is also part of Celtic spirituality. That sense of, it's translatable, but as often as you read with translations, there'll always be in parentheses, there really is no real word in the English language to say what this word means in the German language or in the Latin, or whatever, that kind of thing. So, so it isn't quite the same. So the Celts the Celts themselves were pretty much their way of ritual and spirituality, and there is a controversy of whether or not it's a religion or a spirituality, depending on who you read, and how you want to interpret it. But that was pretty much wiped out, beginning with Romanization of the known empire, the world at the time. But then when Christianity came along, it was pretty well wiped out. The curious piece about the Celts I found is that they're very adaptable, and they learned all the time. They were always learning. So so they call it that, So 3 in 1, this whole thing of integration and oneness and both and going on. Well, okay, we'll go with that. So you say there's a Trinity. Well, okay, we'll do that. It was like they were translating it basically into their spiritual path. And the Christians are doing that now with the traditional Celtic path. And so it goes sort of both and, but Celtic spirituality, I think, has basic principles of living in a both and, living in the spirit that's embodied in all of being, nature, stone. There's nothing that's not sparked with some sort of cosmic energy or divine energy. It's dark and light, sorrow and joy. All of that is all one. Okay. There isn't a dualism in the spirituality. It as I understand it, it's a way of saying, can you see the breath in every existing being on planet Earth and beyond in the cosmic realm? Do we see that somehow there's this breath that's particular to me and also universal, because we all are breathing?
Yeah. Both and.
Yeah.
Both and. Is this something that you practice and live in a solitary way, or you said it wasn't an organized type of thing, there was no structure, but is this something that you are able to celebrate with other practitioners, or is this more of a personal way of living?
It's yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
Of course. It's both and.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. You got it. Yes and yes. Yes and yes. Yeah.
How does it manifest in your life? Do you find that you want to gather with other people who are practicing what you are practicing, or in that it's like a daily type of thing, or is it just more when it comes to particular holidays or things like that? Or because I kind of want to liken it to like a coven or something like that. Is that how you can look at it in a way that you have, all the individual practitioners, but that they kind of form maybe a loosely based or loosely formed group in that sense? Or is there just no group whatsoever?
Right. There is a group of us.
Okay.
I in the Quad Cities where I live, there's a program called COM University, which is community university, that every February, this organization invites professors and other folks who have an interest or a hobby that they would love to share with others. Okay. And would they be willing to do a mini course the fourth Sundays of February for 2 hours each February morning? It's just sort of like a little mini course introduction. Mm-hmm. And when I was in the education department at Augustana College, one of the professors who was involved in COM University asked me if I would be interested in teaching something for this COM University. And at that time I was teaching assessment of student learning, and I could not imagine anyone wanting to learn about how to assess student learning. And she says, but you're interested in and you talk a lot about Celtic spirituality, and I go, oh, I'd love to share that,
Right.
So I did. It was thanks to Katie Hansen, I got involved in COM University to share this. And so I did, and I went through the 4 weeks. And after it was over with, the participants said, and I would give them information I would share. It was like a teaching and experience. So we always did a spiritual experience along with what I would talk about. Because you don't get it with just a head, or it's right. Again the both and yes. You have to So they said, can we keep doing this? And I thought, well, I guess so. Why not? I'd love to keep sharing it. Why not? Yeah. So we did. I think okay. I don't know how many years so we've been meeting. I've been what I would say facilitating a gathering. I call it the Celtic Sunday Gathering once a month. And the invitation, I have a listserv of people who have been in the program. And then folks who have been in the program who don't come, but somebody else comes and says, well, can I invite so-and-so? I said, you can invite anybody you want. It's just, come, I love to share this. I love to have this process. Yeah. So we've been doing that probably 7 years now, 7 or 8 years, once a month. Great. And it usually is a topic of the season, of one of the 4 seasons that we're in, and share a little bit. Initially, I started out with more teaching because I'm a teacher at heart. I love to I love to do that. And I thought, I got to get out of the teacher mode and get more into the facilitator mode, So I started to transition a bit. So I don't know that everyone who comes, and it's always an open. There's people who come once a year. There's others who come more consistently. It's always in and out, and we meet at a place that's a open to anybody place. It's called the Butterworth Center. It was John Deere's daughter, I think her granddaughter, I'm not sure who it was, but when she died, she left her estate to the city of Moline, and now it's a civic center that anybody can use for nonprofits. Wonderful place, which I wanted to go to because I had been invited to go to different churches, with rooms and stuff, and I thought, this is not a religion. Right. This is a spirituality. I don't want it to be connected with any church, even inadvertently do that. Yeah. So we've been doing, and it's so we do more into the experiential and talk about the themes, and we always have the wisdom circle, the Celtic wisdom circle. So we'll start with the opening of the sacred space and honoring the directions and whatever the theme might be, and then the wisdom circles are really where the spirituality takes life in form.
Okay.
Of women. And curiously, we've had in the whole 7 years, 3 men come. So it is more a coven than anything else now.
Yeah.
Not that they were, but I think there is something that speaks to the freedom of exploration and questioning in women. That this format and I think the spirituality offers. You can question everything. Who knows? And if someone says, well, what about da-da-da-da? Do you think it does? Well, why not?
Yeah. Can explore that.
You explore it,
right, Right.
Who knows? Who knows?
That's interesting that it seems to speak so powerfully to women in particular. That's an interesting aspect of it. You also mentioned the circle, and I think that this circle, that this is a concept within Celtic spirituality that people probably have heard about, like the circle, but also the Celtic Wheel. It's probably been something that has come up somewhere at some time that people have heard about. But what is that exactly? I mean, you mentioned the seasons and things like that, so I'm thinking it has something to do with nature. But if you can talk more about what the Celtic Wheel is and how is this used? How is this concept used?
And again, always within the understanding that this is Pat Shea.
Okay. How do you use it?
Yeah, how? Because I have read some beautiful, there's tons of gorgeous writers. And the ones that are still in this realm would be rolling their eyes probably as I have interpreted it. And I'm sure some of them in the other realms are probably also rolling their eyes, but they'll probably think, oh, well, maybe so, who knows, But the Celts, in their own way, were... as many ancient and indigenous traditions. This is universal in indigenous traditions of being very attuned to the earth. very, very attuned and one with the earth, and also knowing how to live in and read and interpret earth and sky, sun, moon, stars, earth, and having a sense that this is all interconnected somehow. The indigenous knew that beautifully, and they still do. It's we all still do. We just don't know that we know it. But the Celts divided their year into 28 days, which was 13. So 13 months. So it got messed around, and as everything does, and it all evolves, it finally came into the fact of the 12 months, and we'll figure it out. That's what everybody else is using, so we got to figure it out that way. But they're very attuned. The wheel is very attuned to both the sky and the earth. So we look at what's happening with planet Earth and our Mother Earth that we are living on and part of. And we also are very much aware of the moon cycles and also aware of the sun cycles. So in the Northern Hemisphere, looking at this, they figured out, well, we need to celebrate the moving into a new cycle, because they could read the transitional points, which are very important, the luminous kind of ways of seeing, and the transition times that are what they would call thin times, that you could get in connection with the spirit better at that time. And they had a sense of that. So eventually it got codified to some extent, so... And it seems to have worked for a good many of us, and it does. It works very lovely. So the beginning of the Celtic year really starts in Samhain. It's Samhain. I have not learned the Celtic language, so I really murder the words. But I look them up and have a translator and practice as often as I can. So I do think Samhain, I'm pronouncing it correctly. But that starts... Always, any kind of a season, any kind of a festival, always starts the eve of what we would call the festival day, because the Celtic spirituality and the Celts understood that life begins in darkness, that all darkness is an opportunity for the seed to get comfortable enough to break open the hulk and to start to grow. It's also in the darkness that we do have that very thin time between light. You know how you see things in the dark that you don't see in the night? Sometimes scary, and I think sometimes it feels scary because there is that other dimension, that spirit dimension that feels more comfortable to express themselves in that quieter light, not in that neon bright light. So it always starts, and that's where the whole festival of Halloween started, that was translated by the Christians into Hallows Eve and to All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. Well, that was really... taking the lead, maybe inadvertently, from the Celts and others, of knowing that the night before going into Samhain, that dark season, that it is a thin time, and we can become more alert to the spirit that is always there, just like breath. We become more alert to it, more sensitive to it. We can feel it more. We can see it more. If you do mindful meditation, you have that sense. You say, follow the breath, and and you think you do that all the time, but you don't realize that air at your nostril and going down your throat.
Right.
So it starts there. So Samhain starts, and that's the winter time, and that is November, December, and January. So you get together and you have the festival, big bonfires, knowing you're going into the light, wanting to keep the light, knowing it's going to get dark. Let's do a lot of fires, bonfires, keep it going, and encouraging the sun to keep coming, because we're going into this darker season, and will you keep coming? Will you keep coming? Right. Like little kids, will you come back? Can I have more? That kind of thing. And then we get to the midwinter solstice, which is another sun celebration, because we want to make sure, and this is the Yule and what the Christians put as Christmas, but it was a celebration of, because they knew that around this time, the Mother Earth was shifting a bit and we were going back to light. They knew that. And so they were going to celebrate that in the midst of darkness, in the very middle of the 3 months of winter. We have this celebration of light.
So the light comes back to the world then.
Yeah. Sun doesn't leave. Right. Don't worry about it. Right. And it was also a wonderful opportunity to bring everyone together in community again for celebrations, because we were living all of November up to middle December. So 6 weeks of tough times, basically. Yeah. So let's come together. And, when you chop up a carrot, it gets bigger because there's more carrot. So let's all get together and chop up everything we have and share it and celebrate it, and we'll be richer for it. Yeah. And so that goes on until we get to the last day of January, and it's the eve of Imbolc, Imbolc. And that's the spring season, which is very curious in the Celtic Wheel, is that Samhain and Imbolc are in the half year of darkness. And summer and autumn are in the light years, in the light year of the circle. So we're still in the dark part of the circle, which is so fascinating to me when I learned this, because I thought, we're starting spring the first day of February. It's cold. It snows. What are we doing? And but it was that whole piece of, and actually here in the Quad Cities, I live in Illinois and in Iowa, in Illinois too. But in Iowa, there's lots of farms, tons and tons of farms. And one of the women who grew up on a farm said, "Oh yeah, that's when the lambs start getting born," and that's what Imbolc means, first milk. So it's like the lambing is starting. That's spring, birth, and I said, "Oh yeah." Not having ever been on a farm, I wouldn't have a clue that but they are, and so I thought it just deepened my real respect and awe in the wisdom of Celtic people and indigenous people, and the wisdom of staying on this path of Celtic spirituality, that there is such deep wisdom. I won't have enough lifetime on this dear Mother Earth to understand it all. There's just not enough lifetime to do it. But so it's spring. And then so it's February, March, and April are the season of Imbolc, the spring season. And again, Imbolc had a lovely feast, but a quieter one, because it was still in the middle of the winter. And it was the time was pretty busy too, in the sense of getting ready for the fields and all those kinds. I don't know all of this. It's my dear farming friends who know way more about this than I do. But anyway, then we get to May 1st, and again the eve, and that's Beltane, and that is the first month, and it's the opening season of light and warmth. And May, the wonderful month of May, King Arthur and Camelot, that song, they got it pretty spot on about what happens, I think that's the other thing that I love so much about the Celtic spirit and the Celtic spirituality is that it can be riotous. We don't have to be so sober and serious all the time. It's like, really? They had parties and celebrations, and then we have May and they go berserk, and go do whatever, whenever, however, and it's just like, what a glorious free spirit. And I think spirit is like that. We can't contain it, and they had that sense of it. So then we live, I forgot the spring equinox in the middle of spring, March, which is also very interesting because the Celtic seasons are like an X across a circle, and the solstice celebrations are like the cross across the circle. So it's a real cool circle, really, when you look at it that way, And then we get into the summer solstice in June, and then the 1st of August is autumn. And I never realized this until I started. It's sort of fun to see the symbolism. Apples become, at least in here in the Midwest, they become ripe in August. You have some great apple season, well, that's the first harvest.
Right.
Is that, It's like, I almost, when I keep thinking this and I keep reflecting on it and pondering, I keep on thinking, my heavens, Patricia, duh. Are you really that slow? You don't get this, We're going into autumn. We're going into harvesting, and then we have the autumn equinox in September. So almost every month, 8 out of the 12 have a way of reminding us of spirit, reminding us that we are experiencing the turning of our own souls toward the source of greater spiritual light. That we keep doing that. We keep getting these reminders. And the circle isn't a closed circle. It's always a spiral circle because we're always going out. We repeat the names and the celebrations maybe. The experience isn't the same though. Because the spiral pulls us out to a new reality. If we follow the invitations to circle and to spiral into a greater spiritual life.
That's beautiful. I like the way you explain that. That's really, really, really nice. I imagine then that at these times of celebration that rituals would be performed. Yeah. Can you talk about the rituals?
Yes. Yeah, I think as I understand the Celts, the little that I understand the Celts, they were very grounded in where they lived and in their earth. And so, their polytheism was really polytheism, because if I lived in Kildare and you lived in, we'll say Kilkenny or someplace else, or even further away than that, you might have different gods and goddesses than I do, because you have a different earth, you have different ancestors. So ritual would probably be different for everyone of some sort. I don't think you could find an absolute ritual, but you would find symbols and symbolism of ritual that would talk to that season, and would talk to that. So we're in Samhain right now, we're going toward the winter solstice, so big fires, bringing together a time to have light and seek light. Those would be you would develop a ritual around that. And when we do our Sunday Celtic gatherings once a month, usually, we're always in one of these seasons, I try to do something that would ritualize that idea. Like we just had our November gathering. And November, and as we're going into the first month of Samhain, is very much focused on ancestors. And, so we did a ritual that we did an invitation of our ancestors and our kindreds, because in the Celtic sense, our ancestors are the trees and the stones and the animals, all of that kind of sense. And then we also did another ritual that Maura Freeman, in her Kindling the Celtic Spirit, has a lot of lovely rituals that I springboard from. But the ritual of the apple and how rich that symbol is, and cutting it into 8 different sections to honor the different directions that would invite the ancestors of all those different directions. And we did that kind of a thing. And there is a ritual of sort of like, I always say, we don't make a sacred space, we remember the sacred space. So there's always starting out with the encircling, of reminding us that we live within this circle, that we're in a sacred space. It's always there. It's just we don't take time to acknowledge it,
Yeah, yeah.
And that's not any more peculiar than things that happen on a daily basis that all of a sudden, well, I never saw that before. There could be something in our house that was built or, and you think, when did you put that there? And, it's like, it's always been there.
Yeah. So you're remembering it actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So if the light, the symbol of light is very important, and you mentioned bonfires a few times. So practical, like for people who don't have access to fields and big piles of wood to make a bonfire, like a substitute that you could use for that is a candle. Then I would say,
right. Even those electric candles, those ones that you can't, you just we actually, because of Butterworth Center, we can't light candles. So I just bring the electric ones.
Okay. Right. Because it's the idea behind it and the intention.
Right. Yeah. Ritual is created to help us remember something beyond us, bigger than what it shows.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. So this sounds like, from, my own studies in esotericism, alchemy, astrology, things like that, there's an adage, as above, so below. So would you resonate with that adage?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. That whole tree of life that is in almost every culture, that's you find it somewhere. That's exactly what that is. Yeah. As above, so below.
Right.
And then in between.
And the in between. And the chain that links it all together.
Right.
That connects it all together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in my understanding, in my spirituality, it isn't a linear chain, it's a circular chain. Because if you look at, the root system comes up, goes through the middle, goes up to the trees or whatever plant or whatever living creature gives off their gifts that go all the way around and down. It isn't just an up and down. It isn't just an as above, so below. It's as above, so over on the north and the east and the south and the southwest. It's like
in all directions.
In all directions.
Right. Yes, that's a very good point to make. Because I was making the up and down gesture, which was not exactly correct.
Well, it's not wrong. It's a both and. You can look at it as up and down and circular.
Yeah, that's true. It's all of those things together. So okay.
Exactly.
Well, you mentioned before about how indigenous traditions were adapted and kind of transformed when the Romans came into those areas, and Christianity, in that sense, started to morph these traditions that had already existed. Can you share your thoughts regarding the differences that you see in these two ways of looking at nature and at the spiral, this cycle, this wheel that we find ourselves in?
I think that the traditional understanding of Christianity is very dualistic. It's right and wrong, good and bad, divine, human. It's very dualistic.
Yeah.
And many of the indigenous spiritualities are holistic, pluralistic, maybe, and I think that probably is the most stark difference in indigenous and wisdom traditions, many of them, and what's in the more Christian, or I would say Abrahamic religions.
Yeah.
I would put all Abrahamic religions into that, because that is much more rigid. I find it rigid and very stoic, where I find in Celtic spirituality and the little that I studied of the other indigenous understandings is much more fluid. It much more inclusive, and I think that's why Christianity caught on so easily to other indigenous places. Oh, that's how you see it, okay, until they received it, and then it became what you were saying was wrong, and they were saying, well, with the Celt, it was like, it's not wrong. It's just different. That's how you see it. But we'll work together and make this happen. And that's why I think it's still so important to so many of us globally to keep, and because it's in our DNA, it's not going to go away. It's in our clay, that we start to ask, well, is this really the only way you can do it? And the other thing that is so starkly different is the respect for Earth. I find Christianity, with its hierarchy and elitism, very dismissive. Maybe not intentionally, and yet ritualistically, and when you read and live it, very hierarchy, misogynistic, and closed to any idea. And obviously this is super generalizations and super prejudices that I'm speaking of, because they all aren't like this. But this is what the tendency was. And this is how the Roman Empire was when they, this is it. And if you don't like it, we just wipe you out. Where the indigenous, it was the circle, and there had to be leadership. I think of the circle as a circle dance, and I loved circle dance. When I was in the community, when we were in formation, we would learn circle dances so we could all get out and dance, and in all different cultures, circle dances. There always had to be a leader who called the step, so you weren't running into each other in the circle dance. Right. But the leader was no different than those in the circle, except they had to be thinking of the next. They had to be a step or two ahead of us.
Right.
And that leader could pass that on and say, "Okay, enough. Your turn." Okay, I want to not have to be thinking ahead of you all. I want to just be in the moment, And you passed it on. That, I think, is probably one of the biggest differences of the indigenous, because even the indigenous had leaders, had priests and priestesses. I know the Celts did. Women and men were equal. There was as many women warriors. I don't know if as many, but they were more ferocious than the men warriors were. And there were women who were druids, and there are women who were rulers of the communities, and it was just like, yeah, both and
Yes.
both and kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where in the Roman Christian tradition, there was a hierarchy, and in that hierarchy, anything of the earth was the lowest part. It didn't make any difference.
Right. The passage in the Bible about God telling Adam that he had dominion over the earth and all of the creatures on the earth.
I mean, really?
Very different way of I know that not all Christians interpret that as, well, I am in control of everything, and I decide what happens, as the human race decides as to what happens with the earth and everything that lives in the earth, on the earth. But there does seem to be a tendency that there is this dominion over those words that were chosen for the Bible, the English language, those words, that means something. That doesn't mean,
it does.
At least in my opinion, it doesn't mean that, we are all in harmony together and we respect each other. No, that means I'm the boss, and whatever I say, that's what's going to happen. And we see this happening. I mean, not that I'm going to get on a soapbox here, but we see this happening with the lack of respect that human beings seem to have for the earth. So there again is a difference, as you said.
Right. And a destructiveness in that.
Yeah.
There's such an elitism in that kind of thinking. And the Celts, the Celtic spirituality, has such a deep reverence for the earth. And if we reverence the smallest pebble or the one little grain or the drop as part of being sacred, then we by nature could reverence everything and everyone. We could grow to that. Yeah. We could grow into that if we follow that well.
The world would be a very different place if everybody had that way.
Well, and if you look at what we would, Stephanie, and if you look at the indigenous folks, if you look at here in the United States where I live, what a different world it would have been if we would have respected the earth and other people of this earth.
Right.
But the arrogance and the elitism is destructive, and we see that happening.
Yes.
I basically think, dear Mother Earth said, I've had enough. I'm giving you something, hopefully to bring you to your knees, that you'll catch on. Equal COVID-19.
Yeah. Interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. That's something to ponder.
Well, again, pure pancake, but I'm thinking, I really think she said, you all are so dense. You just are not getting it. What if I make you all have a common experience? Maybe you wake up.
Yeah. Okay, so this is getting very, very deep, and it's making me think of like mystical types of experiences. So let's talk about mysticism and how this relates to Celtic spirituality. What are your thoughts about the role that mysticism has?
Mysticism is so misunderstood in so many ways. It really is the reality. We are all mystics if we kept on this journey long enough and going through our spiritual light and life and source and all that. And it's basically being aware of the other dimension than the physical, and being sensitive and really I'm sort of putting my fingers and thumbs together, that kind of sensitivity where you feel that little tiny sense that there is some something, maybe someone, some other, however, whatever word we use to help us understand there is more to us than what meets the eye. The mystic understands that. And the mystical experience is sort of like what the Celts would call, like, in those thin times where you get to go through the veil, or the veil is pulled apart for a minute, and you get a sense, without words, you get a sense of this otherness, of this greater reality. And ritual can help us get to that. You know, it can provide that opportunity for us. And the mystics that have written about the experience struggle to put it into words very often. And then those words are misconstrued and it's sort of like a translation, you know. And we and even when we speak the same language, you know, you and I are speaking English. We translate the word we're using differently from each other because of our experience and our education and our use, you know. So a great linguist once told me words have attitudes.
Yes, like dominion.
Exactly.
Right.
And so when we talk about mystical experiences and how the mystics wrote about them, they used what they could at the time with the words they had. And in fact, most mystical experiences, and most mystics would say, you really can't talk about it.
Right.
You experience it, and you know it. And there are moments where you know you had that experience with the other that doesn't happen on a regular basis. And the mystics didn't happen on another, you know. I remember my first mystical experience was in high school, and it's never happened again, that particular one. And it was so real that I remember even thinking, I was laughing because I think I was probably a sophomore or junior in high school. So probably 15, 16, something like that. And it was such an awakening and seeing things in such a way. And I had such an insight into things. And then I went into the classroom, you know, because I was going to school. And I remembered everything. That whole day, I remembered everything I was told. Of course, the next day I forgot it. But at that moment, it was like, I mean, everything was charged. It was like, there was a charge to it that was different than other ones. Other times I've had these off and on, not that exact same one, but it's always a sense of it's more than a wow. It's not a wow. It's an awe. It's a charge. It's a sense of energy. Is
there some kind of understanding that you receive at that moment? Because that's something that we would hear about or read a lot about in our course of studies, that this ineffable experience that you know you couldn't put words to, that it came with some kind of deep sense of knowing something that you couldn't, and it was just immediate. You just knew something. So there was like this knowledge that you gained. Could you say that happens for you?
I would call it not so much a knowledge as an insight and a connection with the deeper wisdom that resides within.
So it's tapping into that wisdom.
Yes,
okay.
And that wisdom isn't. We all have it. That's the piece that. If I could just leave one thing in my whole life and nobody remembered anything, you don't have to remember about me, but just could remember that we all are gifted with this inner wisdom, this spark of inner wisdom. It's all in us. And it's there. And nobody is, because we're part of this great cosmic energy that created, however this happened, which nobody really knows. We just keep trying to figure out, because again, that elitism and that arrogance of thinking we can figure it out. The physicists knew, Einstein knew, you can't figure this out. We can get it. We'll help you, but give it up, people. That kind of thing. Give it up. But if that's what the mystical experience is about. It's the awakening and the deepening of that light and that wisdom that resides within.
That's beautiful. So, yeah, and that's very, very hard to talk about. So we do have kind of a conundrum that it is a very difficult thing to explain to someone else. But you know it when you feel it.
Right. Mysticism is experiential.
Yes.
Not in the typical understanding of experiential that we would know psychologically or educationally. It's experiential of spirit. It's a spirit experience.
So that what you were talking about before about more than what, I can't remember now exactly how you said it. There's something greater than what you just see around you.
Yeah, more than what meets the eye.
More than what meets the eye. So it's that feeling that.
Yeah.
Experiencing that.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting how this is tying into what we were talking about in a separate private conversation about anomalous experiences, that there are these things that happen to people that you can't explain. There is no theory, there is no methodology, there is nothing that you can use to explain it. And I think that is frustrating for people because they want to talk about it, but they can't, or they don't know how. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So we have to try to come up with ways to talk about it, I guess.
Right. And just like you asking me that question, it's like, the piece that I think is helpful in the sharing of mystical experiences is that, as you are doing so beautifully and respectfully and deeply, listening. You're listening. And when I can do that for another who's talking about their experience, and receive it, just receive it. If we would have more platforms, in the sense of platforms and meaning opportunities to come together to share and talk about this happened, and I don't know what to make of it, or I don't really want to say what happened, but I just want to tell you I had this really extraordinary experience. And if I could say, wow, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. If we could,
moments like that.
Pardon me?
More moments like that, to have moments like that more often. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And not to have it seem like you're some kind of weirdo because you've had a extraordinary experience.
Right, like the wingnut, that I often refer to I know some of my family say that, she's just a real wingnut, like, okay, I sort of like wingnuts.
Embrace them.
Yeah, but why not? They're really important. They hold that screw in somehow. I don't know, I'm not really sure how they do it, but the one that's, and isn't that interesting? The linear one, the wingnut holds that through, that goes around and round.
Right.
Hold it in place.
Interesting how that thing that is holding things in place is looked at as if being abnormal.
Yeah.
When it's actually the most normal thing there is.
Yeah.
Things that hold it together. You mentioned COVID-19, and I'd like to come back to that right now. This year, it's been one of extreme turmoil, great loss for many, many people all over the world, and the suffering that many people have experienced or are experiencing now due to this virus. It's not over. And, there are all these issues that stem from it, that relate to it, the psychological effects of isolation, all of this, all these other things that you wouldn't maybe immediately think of when you think of, a virus, making people so ill. In addition to that, we're in this month of the, holiday period. It's very important for a lot of people, a very important holiday. It's difficult for a lot of people because they are constantly reminded in this month that they've lost people. And due to this virus, they could have lost somebody today. And also due to other things as well, due to other illnesses. It's not just limited to COVID, of course. But it is a common thing that, a lot of people know that these types of holidays often make people feel, instead of feeling, happy and joyful, they feel very alone and isolated. And, due to the pandemic, this isolation is even greater because we've had to be practicing social distancing and even quarantining in some cases. So you touched on this earlier, but I was hoping if you could talk a little bit more about how, or what, I guess perhaps would be a better question. What can Celtic spirituality teach us and help us understand, or how can it help us to understand living in this type of world as we find ourselves now in these troubled times? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say that Celtic spirituality, my Celtic spirituality, I don't know that it teaches us anything as much as it might invite us to explore and ponder.
Okay.
And one of the things, because the teaching happens through the exploration and the pondering.
Okay.
I think, but I do think that there are some elements of Celtic spirituality that are helping me through this pandemic. And the first one is to me, probably one of the most essential ones, is the both and reality. That I can be grieving, I can be wailing, I can be angry, I can be despondent and despairing, and I can be rejoicing, I can be happy, I can be at peace. One doesn't negate the other. And if we try to get to the peace and happiness and let's get over this without, and it's that going into the darkness. And I find this so interesting right now. We're getting information that the pandemic is going to get worse and worse, especially, through December and January. Mm-hmm. And those are the dark months of the Celtic year. Those are also the time that if we, and in the Celtic time, just generally because they didn't have a whole lot of light, they had to spend more time indoors, and they did spend more time indoors, but they rested and they relaxed and they reflected, and it's a time to be rejuvenated. So in my loss and my deep grief, that's the pain of going into the depth of our reality right now with, for me, believing and knowing that if I do this and honor it and don't try to get over it or get through it, but just walk with it, I'll walk into a light. I'll get a new insight. So when I'm grieving, and I am, Thanksgiving was the second anniversary of my sister Mary's death, which I miss her fiercely, and lots of people. I mean, she is bigger than life now, but she was bigger than life when she was in the physical form. But that grieving and that having that sense of loss also helps me remember, what do I need to learn from this? What's the wisdom of this loss and this grief? And how do I hold it? And how am I tender with it and tender with myself, so that it, never having had children, knowing my sister Mary and other women who have had children, that time of gestation in the womb, and my dear sister-in-law who has two, and my nieces who have beautiful children, they should be talking now, because that time in the womb isn't always happy time. I mean, you have met crabby pregnant women.
Definitely.
I've met crabby pregnant women, and with good reason. Everything is out of kilter. You know, physiologically it's out of kilter, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually is out of kilter. What do I make of this? What is this about? How do I do this? And the pain that comes in the birthing. There is not one woman that I've ever known or spoken with in the birthing process that said, oh, piece of cake, didn't even feel it, unless they were totally put out.
Right.
You know, but their poor body was feeling it. And body has memories. Cells have memories, you know? So I think this, and I really do believe that Mother Earth is just tired of our arrogance as human beings. Just sort of like, really, really humans, really, you know, it's like the mother who says, okay, enough. Go to your rooms or go sit in the corner, figure it out, and then come back out. That's what this is an opportunity for us to do, actually, if we use it well, to go into our corners, to go into that isolation and try to figure it out, not for the world, but to figure it out for me. What am I doing? You see, I think in genuine spirituality, I'm not here to change the world. I am here to grow into the fullness of who I'm supposed to be. That's my purpose. That's the hardest purpose to live in. To come into the fullness of who I am. That's what each of us is called to do. And if we were doing that, Mother Earth is saying, please, please, get a grip. Go into your corner. Who are you? Can you figure it out? And we'll come out of that corner as every little kid, whoever, unfortunately, I have seen in corners or maybe even put in a corner, figuratively or actually. We don't get it all, but we get a new, well, maybe if I do this. I'll always raise my hand before I start talking it's the one who's blurting out all the time and talking over everyone, you know, and you say, please go practice raising your hand, you know, and then say something. Well, the blurting out won't stop, but I'll blurt out and raise my hand at the, you know, and I've seen that happen actually too often. But it's a step, you know, yeah. I got it. I'm supposed to raise my hand, but I'm still going to talk, you know, but, I really do think that I think, and I shouldn't say we, I should say I need to use this opportunity, as hard as it is, as grief-filled as it is, as challenging as it is, to at least ask the question, what am I supposed to learn? Just ask that question.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get the answer. I won't get the full answer. If we all start asking that question, what do I need to learn? What can I do ever so slightly different that might help living on dear planet Mother Earth and might help the folks that I interact with. Maybe I can help them live more easily and gently on Mother Earth and together. So again, it's that lovely both and,
Yeah.
It's that ever so slight, did you see that light on over there? And I thought, I never noticed that light, how it reflects off. You show that to me because that's what you learn, to look more at stuff that's there that you never paid attention to before. And then you get excited about it and you want to share it with everyone.
Right. Right.
And then there's people who don't want to hear it. And that's okay. It's okay. We are not I'm not here to save the world, although I would love to. And I'm not the Empress of the universe, although there's very often times I wish I was. I mean, really. And those are that's the wisdom of dear Mother Earth and of the other reality, and the spirit reality is saying, you, Pat, you are not the Empress of the universe. You are not here to save the world. You are here to be the best of who you can be at the time and to stay on the path. And if that path, like mine did, when there were divergent places to go, I stayed on the path, though. I stayed on the path. The path of trying to look for, who am I? Why am I here? And I've been on the planet for a good long time. 73 years is a beginning of a time of being long on the planet. Not long enough, mind you, but and I look at how much I don't know. I'm thinking, my lands, the earth cannot hold what I don't know. So we're always on the path, and if we could help each other and be gentle with each other and gentle with ourselves, the walking the path will be easier. It'll always be difficult. We'll always have grief. We'll always have loss. That's the cycle of Earth. There is nothing on this earth that is living forever. Even those wonderful great trees that are there for almost centuries, some of them get sick and die. We just don't live long enough to see that cycle. There's always that cycle of death, going into the dark, new life, new birth. That doesn't stop. Even with COVID, it doesn't stop. I have a lovely dear friend whose father died, and just a few days later, her grandson was born. This was just in October, during COVID. And it was, when she was sharing that, that was one of those mystical moments that gave me the chills of, where it sort of takes your breath away.
Yeah.
That close of seeing the circle of life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing your experiences.
Well, Steph, you have to make me be quiet because I could go on and on and on. Because I just say, oh, this is just such a gift. Yeah. You want to share it with everybody.
Yeah.
And it really, the Celtic spirituality, and I think any spirituality that resonates within your soul, you get that, I've come home to it. Yeah. This is how I live. Yeah. That's what happened for me. Yeah. And that's why I'm so grateful to you for the opportunity to share this enthusiasm.
Well, it's palpable. It's you radiate it. So I'm so thankful that you agreed to share your experiences and your wisdom with me today. I really appreciate it, and I'm so happy that it's kind of been a joke in our family that Pat should write a book. Pat should do all. So I'm like, at least I can get her on an interview. She might not write that book, but I can get her on an interview.
No.
So I really appreciate
it. It has been a soulfully and genuinely privilege to be with you, Stephanie, and to give me the opportunity to share the love and the joy of this way of living, and grief in the way of living. It's all there.
Both
One doesn't take away. Yes, both and. Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
I am happy. I'm so happy to offer you that opportunity to do that, because it was. I think this is a very different type of interview than I normally do. Well, normally I've not been doing it that long, but my general approach is to interview more of a scholarly type of approach to talking about subjects from the etic, the outsider, looking into how other people experience things. And I thought it might be different and interesting to try a different way of looking at things. So, and looking at it from the inside out. And I just find both fascinating, but I find your way of talking about things so refreshing. It gives hope, because even if you do have a very horrible situation that you're in the middle of, the way you talk about it is in a way I feel like, well, there is that light. Mm-hmm. There is that cycle that, you'll get through it. It will, it's something that there's almost like a trust that you can put into it, I guess.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of saying that. And the other thing that I think is very, for me, important to remember is that if I don't get through it on this, because we ground everything just in the physical reality, it's okay. I will get the understanding, and I'll get that release and that joy somewhere, somehow. It doesn't have to be this life cycle or this lifetime. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be exploded into the great cosmic energies, and if I don't get it then, but I figured the great cosmic energies will help me.
Of course they will. So I hope that the listeners will be able to take something positive away from this talk that we've had today, as I've been able to take a lot of good lessons away from what you've shared. You have provided a wonderful list of resources. You've mentioned a few names throughout our talk today, but I will make sure that I share that in the podcast notes, so that if other people are interested to know more about the things that you're talking about, and that other people's ideas about Celtic spirituality, then they will be able to find that out, what you have suggested that people can look into. So thank you for that. And I guess right now I just want to wish you a very peaceful solstice. And thank you for coming to the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie.
I hope you've enjoyed this month's different approach. And I thank my Aunt Pat again for sharing her perspectives in this special episode. As we near the end of 2020, it might be of interest to note that on this year's winter solstice, that happens on the 21st, the largest planets of our solar system, Jupiter and Saturn, will align in a great conjunction in Aquarius for the first time in nearly 400 years. Some astrologers claim that this is a forerunner, or a dawning of the age of Aquarius, as the famous song goes. As Aquarius is an air sign that represents ideas and the intellect, some propose that this great conjunction will spark a new wave of progress within technology and medicine, and will also bring a benevolent, philanthropic spirit along with it. I think this would be a great change, especially after the year we've all had. So, happy solstice, everyone, and remember to be gentle with each other and with yourself. Thanks for listening.